When I got the first one, I was literally seconds away from stepping onto the plane when a call from unknown blared from my cell phone. It was a ringtone I hadn't heard before, one I was pretty sure hadn't come with the phone. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped to answer it, but I was expecting a call about a job I had interviewed for the previous week. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. "Hello, do not get on the plane." A woman's voice was garbled and strange, as if her vocal cords had been shredded, and she was trying desperately to choke out speech. Despite the unnerving, fractured quality of her voice, her tone was insistent and eerily calm. Then the call ended. I froze. I had always had a slight phobia of air travel, and something about this call just said, there's no way I was about to get on a 7-hour flight now. I turned around and headed toward the food court. I'd just get another flight later in the afternoon, I figured. I watched from the airport Starbucks 3 hours later as every TV in the terminal lit up with the crash footage of the plane I should have been on. No survivors, not a single one. I tried to trace the call. So did the police. But there was nothing to trace. There was no evidence my phone had ever received a call around that time. They analyzed phone records, incoming and outgoing communication to my phone, and nothing. I wasn't making it up. I couldn't have been. That wasn't the only call. Throughout the years, they were few and far between, but always right, and I always listened. Do not go on that blind date tonight. 5 months later, my would-be date was convicted of killing 4 women, all with my hair color and build. I found them in a shallow grave about 250 feet from the diner he offered to take me to. Do not drive to the concert tonight. 18-wheelers lost control and plowed into a line of cars. Every driver was crushed. Every driver was killed. In the stretch of freeway I would have been driving down, no matter if I got a new phone or if I moved across the country, the calls would still come. I could almost feel the presence of whatever it was, whatever it is, watching over me. I imagined being at the bottom of the freezing ocean, still strapped into my coach section plane seat, or being in that mass grave across from the diner, or watching an 18-wheeler skidding toward my car, knowing death was imminent, and I'd get this tightness in my chest. I'd think about how thin that line was, how close I'd gotten. If I hadn't had a job interview I was waiting to hear back from, I'd have never listened to that first call, and that would be it for me. It always felt like something was coming for me. But there was always this fractured, warped voice, with these calls that never seemed to exist after I heard them. Self-destructing warning signals, rotting away before my eyes. And I was alive. I had a bad feeling about this cruise. I had planned it as a girls' week out with some of my old friends from college, and was looking forward to a week in the tropics in the dead of winter. But part of me could almost sense that the call was coming. Maybe I'd watched Titanic too many times, but there was a little nagging fear from the start. I hoped it would be fine, but I knew that if something was going to happen, I'd get the call. I'd know. Now, a week before I'm set to go on the cruise, after stepping into my apartment after returning from dinner with a friend, I notice my cell has a message from unknown. They've never had to leave a message before. I haven't checked it all night. Damn it, and I had really wanted to go on that cruise too. Ah, well, not worth whatever horrific fate awaited me in that cold, dark ocean. I click play message and feel my stomach drop as I listen to the voice, which sounds horrifically distorted, as if it emanates from a throat slashed to ribbons, crackling with more urgency than ever before. I look around my apartment as the voice on the phone repeats the same phrase over and over again. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Down the line we went, shuffling timidly as the guards watched like hawks through mirrored sunglasses. Step by step, we moved along, slowly, desperately trying to delay the inevitable, or at least prepare ourselves mentally for what was to come. Each one is looking down, avoiding eye contact with the prison guards, and keeping their gazes firmly glued to the man in front of them. They can't keep doing this to us. This is a free country. whispered the man behind me. I didn't bother to respond. It wouldn't do any good to discuss the situation. Probably just make it worse. He continued, "This has to be a cruel and unusual punishment, or something, right? Maybe we should get a lawyer and see if we can do anything about it." The thought stirred a slight bit of hope inside me, but something still told me that it would only worsen the already awful dilemma we faced. Slowly, we marched on, further and further down the line. The smell thickened, almost making me nauseous. I looked up at the balcony overlooking the large room. Several guards stood together, rifles in hand, smirking down at us. They must enjoy seeing us do this every week. The line stopped. Hope. I could see at the front of the line that a man had halted. He couldn't bring himself to move any further. Whether it was fear, hatred, or defiance, it was only a futile attempt to resist the inevitable. A guard quickly shoved him along with the butt of his rifle, and the line moved on. We were so close. Oh God, the smell. It was awful. I picked up the cold metal tray on the counter next to me and moved forward, tears slowly welling in my eyes. How I've made it this far and survived this many times, I will never know. There were only 3 men in front of me now. I would soon have to face this evil once again. 2 men are ahead of me. I thought about running. I began scanning the environment around me, looking for a way out or a path through the guards. My grip on the tray tightened. Only 1 man is ahead now. I forgot about any hope of escape and took a deep breath. I slowly looked up at the sign posted on the wall ahead of me. Even though I look at it every week, I still feel the urge to drop to my knees once I read it. Chilly night. It was my turn. I held up my tray and let the burly man pour the sickeningly brown concoction into my bowl. I fought back tears as I walked over to the table with the other men and sat down. I looked down at it. It was an abomination, a crime against humanity. I couldn't even understand how it was considered food. This dish brought murderers and bank robbers to tears. How could any man serve this to another human being? I lifted my spoon and closed my eyes as I brought it to my lips. I will not describe my experience eating it. I just can't. What I will say is that tears were shed, blood was spilled, and men were broken. Some inmates argue that the aftermath is the worst part. I could agree. This chili has the power to clean out your colon in under 2 hours, and you felt it every step of the way, slithering through your intestines like a plumbing snake. My cellmate and I continuously fought over the small metal toilet in the corner of our cell. We ended up taking shifts. One of us got it for 3 minutes, while the other stood back desperately clutching his rear end, trying to contain the beast that was awakened inside our digestive tract. Our cell block was filled with screams of agony. They say chilly night is the best time to escape, because no guard dares enter the prison blocks due to the permeating stench that could strip paint from a wall and bend a steel beam. After 3 hours, the block became quiet. "Is it over?" I heard a voice ask from down the hall. "Yes, it's over." When I was in the 5th grade, our class would spend a week at a camp. Only people from our class/school would go. All that week, there'd been a lot of talk about a girl who had drowned in the lagoon a few years back. I heard many weird things from other kids, scratching at the bottom of kayaks, hearing yelling and splashing at night with no one there. Most of this, I chalked up to other kids my age being retarded. The counselors wouldn't talk to us about it. One night, we were supposed to have a guy talk to us about snakes and lizards for a night session. We had punch and cookies and waited on him for a long time. The counselors told us he wasn't coming, but they weren't sure what happened to him. They didn't get a phone call. I never found out why he didn't show up. So we all milled around in the main lodge instead. A girl I didn't recognize approached me and asked if I'd heard about the story of the girl who drowned in the lagoon. I hadn't related to her briefly, and she told me that the story I heard wasn't true, that the girl had been meeting her boyfriend. We weren't allowed to be out at night with the boys or hold hands, etc. and they'd fought. It's been since 5th grade, but I'm sure the kid left her to drown. The story, and how the girl talked, got to me for some reason. Also, the girl who had died was supposed to have long black hair and glasses, which the person I was talking to did. After she walked away, I picked her out from the other students again and told her, "I don't believe in ghosts." She replied, "I do." After that, she wandered off, and I couldn't find her anymore. I asked about her with classmates and spent a few weeks after I got back trying to scout her out in the cafeteria. I skipped class one day to scout all the lunch periods, but I never saw her again. I want to add that there are some incongruent things. The girl also said some bizarre things, like that the ghost of the girl could possess the girls at the lodge during the full moon if it fell on a Wednesday. It wasn't Wednesday. Also, as far as I can tell, no one was ever drowned in that lagoon. I haven't been able to find information on it since, just the string of reports from the other kids and the creepy girl who disappeared. As the dead of winter approaches, you may find yourself alone at night, feeling isolated and abandoned in an all-too-empty bed as the night grows ever bleaker. Ghastly shadows dance across the wall. The crying wind is battering against your window. An ambulance siren in the distance, and there's no one there to convince you that you didn't hear those gunshots. There's no one there. No one was there. But do not be afraid. He waits for you. Wait for the moon to hide itself, perhaps behind a gathering of clouds. Midnight is the best time to do this. Just close your eyes and hold your breath as you leave your bed. You may open your eyes once you exit your bedroom. Get dressed if you like, because you'll be leaving your house soon. Take nothing with you except for what you can keep in your pockets. Then, drive out of town. Drive as far away from civilization as you possibly can. Eventually, the air will become still. Then a dense fog will form just a short way down the road. You will hear nothing but silence as you approach it. Let it consume you and your vehicle. No harm will come to you from it. I promise. Do not be afraid. He waits for you. The fog will lift. You will see a dimly lit motel, stranded and alone in the night, just like you. As you walk inside, notice that there is no one else there. The only sign of human occupation will be a small key on the front desk. Take these keys, wander the corridors until you find the proper room. You will soon know exactly where it is, but you won't know why. Use your key to enter this room. Walk in and lie down on the bed. It's no more comforting than your bed at home. There's nothing but pure silence for miles. Death hangs in the air all around you. And it's so cold. You're still alone and frightened, but it's okay. He's frightened too, and it's just so cold. Cold enough to hold the pillow close to your body, burying your face in its softness and embracing it. Pretend that it's a lover all you want. You won't feel any safer, but you will feel warmer. Open your arms and lift up your head. The warmth is in his arms. Two twisted, mutilated arms trace down your body. There he is, and he's frightened too. You can see it in his blackened, spherical eyes, fixating on your face and twinkling with the light of another dimension. The light shines in specks from beneath his parched skin, making him glow from the inside. Bruises cover his decaying neck, as well as deep, finger-wide indents. It's as if someone had tried to strangle them. He sighs and softly caresses your face. The skin of his hands begins to flake off on you, and you want to sweep it away. But you're stunned, completely stunned, by this strange creature that's completely enamored by you. At least you're not alone anymore. You'll then gather enough will to take your hands and gently lift him off you, placing him by your side. You get a better look at him. His legs are disturbingly crooked, having been broken in so many places and healed in ways that they just weren't meant to. And he won't stop staring at you. Small, glistening tears drip from his eyes. He shivers and trembles, trying to form words with his torn mouth. You can't tell exactly what he's trying to tell you. It doesn't matter for now anyway. He will want to touch you, to hold you, and to comfort you. Whatever pain you have ever felt from loneliness, whatever sorrow you may have felt in your entire life, he feels it. His tears fall on you, and he lies back in submission. He will let you do anything you want to him. He knows that no matter what you do, it will never hurt him as much as what the others have done. It will never hurt him as much as the isolation he's felt in this motel. As you gaze upon his twinkling eyes, you may feel a sudden urge to mutilate him and punish him for existing the way he does. But please be kind. He loves you after all. Spend the night with him. He'll let you do anything, and he won't be able to speak. But be sure to leave the room before sunrise. He will do everything in his power to keep you from leaving. He will grab onto you, cry, and scream at you. Tears will keep gushing from his glowing eyes, disintegrating his skin even further. But no matter how much you pity him, leave. Resist him and leave. If you don't, you will be forever trapped and doomed to live the same existence that he does. Do not let him follow you. Just close the door behind you and lock it. You're alone again. Next thing you know, you'll wake up in your bed at home, sometime after the sun has risen. The events of last night will feel as if they were nothing but a dream. Everything in your home is where you left it last. Your car, your clothes, everything then. If you are lucky, something incredible will happen. Within a few days, you just might meet a new person. This person has everything you want, and it's as if they were made for you. Within time, the two of you will fall in love. You will almost forget the ghoul in the motel and forget about those glowing eyes staring at you. All that will matter is that you will fall in love with this wonderful new person, and they will love you. But once they move in with you, things will grow progressively stranger. As you lie together in bed, you might hear a faint scratching on the door and an all too familiar cry. But do not worry, your companion will keep you from becoming too worried about it. The next night, the cry might become a shriek. The scratching will become a pounding, and only you can hear it. No matter how hard you try to convince your partner of what you hear, they will only tell you to go back to sleep. And one night, you will notice that the noises have vanished. Nights will be peaceful again, and it will just be you and your partner. But from then on, you will constantly look into your lover's eyes. You will notice a new glow in their eyes, twinkling with the light of another dimension. Do not be afraid. He's waited so long for you. One day, my mother drove me and my younger brother home from a gymnastics meet. Since we went out to eat after it, it was getting dark when we finally embarked on our journey home. We were driving down one of the roads to get to our house, which is a secluded branch of a road that veers away from the nearby town. We lived down in the boondocks when I saw what I thought was a little girl curled up on the shoulder of the road. At first, my mom, who had trouble seeing in the dark, didn't see the little girl, but I insisted I saw her. My mom has a very motherly persona, so she opted to turn the car around to see if the girl needed help. We made a U-turn and circled back to where I thought I saw the little girl. When we reached the spot, she was nowhere to be found. My mom wrote it off as me being tired from working so hard, so she made another U-turn to continue on our way home. After about 10 minutes of driving, my little brother yelled from his car seat, "Mama!" The girl. My mom instinctively stomped on the brakes, assuming someone was running into the road out of her view. When we saw nothing, she asked him what he meant. He told her that a little girl was sitting on the side of the road and was afraid she would get hurt since he was taught to stay away from the streets. My mom glanced out of her side mirror, and I craned my neck to look out the rear window. Nothing. After quietly scolding my brother under her breath for fabricating what I thought I saw, Mom began to drive again. The rest of the 20-minute drive was relatively quiet. No one talked, and the little girl didn't show up again. When we finally arrived home, my mom shuffled up the stairs to help my brother prepare for bed. I then remembered I had left my bag in the car, so I turned around in the foyer to go back outside. I walked outside, went to the passenger's door, opened it, reached inside, and grabbed my bag. As I ducked out of the car, out of habit, I glanced out the side mirror. When I did, about 15 feet behind me was the girl I saw on the side of the road about a half hour prior, still curled up and still hugging her knees. The hair on my neck stood up, so I slammed the car door and bolted to my house. I didn't bother turning around. Still, to this day, I avoid traveling down our road / going outside at night. It's a tale as old as the internet itself. You're killing your boredom by browsing the net, mindlessly scrolling through pictures and reading through forums. One click leads to another, and before you know it, you've tripped and fallen down the rabbit hole to the weirder parts of the internet. Now, I'm not all that tech savvy, but I suppose I'm intelligent enough to understand the concept of unlisted websites. Things you can't find through a Google search exist if you have a link provided. I guess that's the essence of the deep web. I tend to browse incognito. I'm not going to go into details, but I think we all know for what purpose. Last night, or this morning, depending on how you classify 3 a.m. and insomnia, I was reading a forum about people's weirdest experiences on the web. I am a skeptical fellow, so when a few diligent commenters provide a link, I will gladly follow to verify their stories. At some point, I happened upon a website that was simply an endless string of numbers ending in .org, leading to a plainly designed forum. "How was your day?" was the main title of said forum. It was a welcome change from the depressing and even horrific stories others had shared thus far in the night. So I decided to check out how people were doing around the world. Maybe focusing on other people's lives would take away focus from my own depressing existence. I clicked on the top entry listed. When I first retired, I was dumbfounded by the amount of dead time I would have to tirelessly get through. Today, perhaps for the first time in 10 years, I appreciated the lazy morning. My wife made my favorite breakfast, and I was even happy to take a midday nap afterwards. I guess my body was just tired, because I never woke up from that. How do I let my wife know I didn't pass in pain and that I love her very much? Mildly confused by his last statement, I checked out the comments below. "We all die sometime. Welcome." And another one said, "If you treated her right, she would know you loved her already." Some sort of role-playing forum was the first thought that came to me. The comments were a perfect collection of welcoming and spiteful comments. I clicked to the next post. Honestly, I've always expected more from life. My day was shitty enough to begin with. Arguing with teenage children is a pointless endeavor that makes me long for the time when they were just happy to have pancakes for breakfast. Anger is just as pointless, as I've come to discover far too late in life. The distraction was the only thing needed to somehow make me miss a red light and, well, I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but here I am, on my final day on this shit planet. He signed his entry with his apparently real name and birth date. It was a fairly uncommon name at that. I opened another tab to check his information in reference to any car accidents. All I found was some old news entry from 2004, but it perfectly matched his story to a T. What kind of sick person pretends to take the identity of someone who died such a horrific death? Both infuriated and intrigued, I kept on reading. I can only blame my own sense of morbid curiosity. I'm not entirely sure how long I spent reading through countless posts from people pretending to have died in various ways at different points in history. Everyone had signed with real names, and not a single commenter called them out for their deluded games. The straw that broke the camel's back was when I noticed a post by a familiar name. My own mother had been dead for over a decade, so I felt fairly certain it was some sort of sick prank or bizarre role play. Maybe the users were looking up obituaries and taking their identities for their own pleasure. I was even more disturbed when they perfectly described the surroundings of her death, despite never having told anyone. I've been feeling extremely tired as of late. It was no surprise when I awoke this morning and felt like I hadn't slept in days. I wanted to just stay in bed, but family duties called. My husband had already left for work, and I had taken the week off in hopes of recovering. But someone has to feed the kids. Breakfast was all right. I fed them their favorite, pancakes. It was easy to prepare, and I had nothing better to do. I remember getting into the shower, but it was getting really hard to catch my breath, and under the steam from the hot water, I simply passed out. I don't really know what happened after that. Oh God, I hope my children didn't see me lying naked on the floor. I decided right then that I would be the righteous one to make them stop stealing people's identities. At least use a fake name if it is nothing more than a pathetic joke. I scanned the page for a register button only to find I was already logged in under my real name. As a matter of fact, with some trepidation, I clicked to expand my profile. On it, someone had written my name, email address, birth date, and death date today. Yet again, my eyes wandered to the title of the website. How was your day? I thought back and reflected on what had happened so far. My life wasn't the most interesting, so I hadn't really taken the time to think about it. There was nothing particularly interesting about my day. Exam period was coming up, so I had to wake up earlier than my young brain was used to. I drank coffee and browsed the internet instead of studying. The procrastination lasted longer than I'm proud to admit. I eventually felt guilty enough to pick up a textbook and study until the evening. A mild headache set in. It was enough to stop me from studying and doing something more relaxing instead. Actually, it might have been more than mild. More like a stabbing pain rapidly increasing in intensity. I got up from my chair and fell to the floor. That's all I remember before blacking out. It's a peculiar feeling when your heart stops, but apparently that's what it takes for you to be able to access the forum for dead people. They'd brought me back, though. I have a vague memory of paramedics bringing me to the hospital and needles being shoved into my veins. I guess my dad must have come upstairs to check on me. Lucky me. I don't really remember much from the hospital or returning home. As a matter of fact, I just now find myself browsing this forum, not really remembering how I stumbled across it. How was your day? When I was 7, my best friend was a girl named Ava, who was my neighbor. Ava was a sweet kid. I didn't realize it at the time, but her home life was pure hell. We would always hear her father screaming and breaking stuff. I was too young to understand that stuff included Ava and her mom. My parents did what they could to relieve Ava of the burden a girl this young should never carry, but they were honestly afraid to meddle too much and end up having something bad happen to our family. So it consisted of inviting her to eat afternoon snacks and meals nearly every day and giving her some clothes since Ava was always poorly dressed. Being sheltered from the violence happening right next door, my childhood was pretty normal, even happy. My father worked an office job, my mother worked from home, and my sister Carly would keep an eye on me. She was 12 at the time and would let me and Ava play in the woods behind our houses as long as there was daylight. It was 1998 in a small town, and life was simple. We loved to play with my Barbies. Poor Ava didn't have any. But we also loved to explore the forest and dig the ground. We would usually find bird bones and pennies buried shallowly. It was an unusually warm November afternoon, right after Ava's 7th birthday. My family bought her a small cake the day before. Now I can't help but think it was our fault she had a swollen, purplish face that day. Ava, you're okay. What happened? I was worried to see her like that. I just fell from the stairs, she said. Her mouth was so severely beaten up that she couldn't even pronounce some phonemes. But I believed her and accepted the answer, soon turning my attention to something else. I'm so sorry, Ava. We decided to use the warm day to birdwatch, which I had been very into in the last few weeks, since my parents gave me some binoculars. For that reason, we entered the forest a little deeper than usual. We found a beautiful nest of junco, full of chicks. I was focused on the birds when Ava had a distant, intrigued look on her face. Are you listening? Sigh. What a beautiful song. Ava was marveling at something, but I couldn't hear it, so I kind of ignored it. After a few minutes, she started walking deeper into the woods, presumably trying to find the source of the beautiful song. I still heard nothing but our footsteps crunching leaves on the ground and distant chirping. I followed Ava without thinking. We walked for a few minutes when she stopped by a huge, majestic old tree. The sunlight glowed in a different way there. I couldn't quite understand, but it was like the air was sprinkled with glitter. And it was peaceful. Ava was looking up at the tree leaves, awestruck. Then she frantically waved her hand, like she had met someone she knew. I looked up too and saw a woman. Well, it certainly was a female. But she had a really small frame, and her skin had a lilac glow. Her long hair seemed to be made of waterfall, and the fabric of her dress was like the wind, if the wind was slightly golden. She descended from the tree and reached the ground with the softest landing. Her voice was pure sweetness, and echoed through my head. "I'm sorry I took this long to answer your prayers, Ava. The song I've been hearing at night, was that you?" Ava gingerly asked. "Yes, my child." She then looked at me. "You? Please leave. It's not your time." I was hypnotized, even a bit afraid, but I complied. The way she talked was nothing but gentle, but her figure held an impressive sense of authority. I left, and as I looked behind me, Ava started to glow like her. Her hair started to seem like a waterfall as well, and her worn-up clothes slowly turned to golden air. When I got home, I went to my room and rehearsed what I would say when people noticed Ava was gone. I was only 7 and couldn't understand a lot of basic concepts, but I had in me both the knowledge that Ava would never return and that people wouldn't believe what I saw. That night, her father aggressively knocked on our door and demanded to know where she was. When asked, I vaguely answered that I played with her by the woods until mid-afternoon but haven't seen her since. My father was the one who called the cops. They said there would be a formal search if Ava was still missing after 72 hours. During the investigation, they suspected her father had murdered her and buried her body in the woods. Her mother was found severely beaten up at home, and he was arrested. The police also found out he had killed his previous wife, so I was more than pacific with my decision to keep quiet about what really happened. After all, I wasn't letting an innocent man suffer. I eventually made new friends and even forgot about Ava for a while. I just remembered this story now, at age 27, because I'm back at home with my family. In the last year, I broke up with an abusive partner, lost my job, and was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Defeated, I decided to move back and have my parents take care of me. I still don't know if it's possible to undergo surgery. Maybe I'll die within a year. At night, I pray things will get better. And lately, I can hear a beautiful, ethereal song no human voice or instrument can ever make. I think Ava is inviting me. The rainy season began in early summer, and June had been no exception. It did not surprise the man when he discovered rainwater dripping from his dining room ceiling. Shrugging it off, he placed a tall pot beneath the leak and expected it to stop. However, it continued to rain. Before he knew it, the bank would threaten to overflow. He had to dump the water out first thing in the morning and immediately after returning home. Eventually, he began to notice water damage at the source of the leak. The white ceiling had discolored, turning a dull shade of brown. He checked the weather and realized it would rain sporadically over the next 10 days. The man was worried about the ceiling mildewing and becoming an expensive repair, so he called a local handyman. Unfortunately, the man could not sign to have the repairs done. Only his landlord could. It was a frustrating policy. The man called his landlord but could not reach him. He left a few voicemails detailing how the damage was worsening. The man was clueless about why his landlord would not return his calls. They usually kept in touch, speaking at least twice a month. Finally, he reasoned that he would not be held accountable for any damages sustained. One night, the man was startled awake by a massive thump. He quickly turned on his bedside lamp, and just vaguely, he could see an overturned table and a large shape lying across it. He sprinted out of his apartment and called the police, gagging at the smell. The man sat in the police station with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and a coffee mug resting in his hands. He did know one thing. There had been a dead body in his ceiling, and the water had saturated it so severely that it caved under the weight. So far, the body was unidentifiable due to the rainwater and was being autopsied. While the man waited, he called his landlord and finally reached him, panicking as he explained the situation. His landlord was just as alarmed, and the man pleaded for him to come to the station while he made his statement. The man paused as a detective crossed over to him, and he lowered his phone, wondering if the body had been identified. His blood ran immediately cold, and he shook his head with terror. The body belonged to Richard Thompson, his landlord, who died over a year ago. That's not what disturbed him the most. If his landlord was dead, then who was pretending to be him? Jeff crawled silently through the bedroom window of his latest victim and gradually crept over the foot of his bed. His last encounter hadn't gone so well. The kid's father had intervened, and Jeff had lost one of his favorite knives when he threw it at the old man, who had startled Jeff when he brandished his shotgun at him. So it was his fault, really. The knife had missed its intended target and embedded itself into the David Bowie poster that hung on the boy's bedroom wall. Just one of life's little ironies, Jeff thought, chuckling to himself. Luckily, he had remembered to bring a spare with him this night, and hiding behind a bush, he applied his hourly eye drops, which were the only way for him to keep his eyes moist since that night when he had removed the lids with a craving knife. It seemed like a good idea at the time. He applied a few extra drops this time as the last struggle, followed by the long, hard run that it took to flee the scene, had dried up his eyes significantly, to the point where he had almost gone blind. "I'll get them later," he muttered to himself shortly after the escape. After all, his father had always told him to finish what he had started. Then again, old Dad got himself carved into coleslaw, so how smart could he have been? Jeff was feeling hopeful about this next venture, though, and he raised the knife high above his head, taking a moment to savor the murder he was about to commit, as he liked to treat every slaying like a Thanksgiving dinner. But as he was about to plunge the knife into his helpless victim, revel in the sensation of his hands submerging themselves in a freshly opened stomach, and giggle at the pitiful gasps of shock and pain that usually followed, he heard a voice that made him stop in his tracks. "Hi there, Smiley," the voice said. "It sure took you long enough to get here." It was the voice of the man in the bed. It spoke in a soft but level tone, without a hint of fear. "Go to sleep," Jeff demanded, in his own grainy and intimidating voice, the voice that stuck helpless terror into the hearts of victims all over town. But this man just chuckled casually. "I'm afraid you're in no position to give orders, son," he said, reveling a very subtle southern drawl that Jeff had not noticed a moment ago. Jeff remained frozen. Now he wanted more than anything to kill this man and get it over with, but he could not move. For the first time since acquiring his deformity and finding employment as the local homicidal maniac, Jeff had felt the icy grip of fear clutch at his spine. "I said, go to sleep," he bellowed. His voice was shaking, as was his entire body. He was shaking so violently that he couldn't hold onto the knife, and it dropped from his hand. Suddenly, the man sat up. The movement was so sudden that it startled Jeff, and he stumbled back a couple paces. Jeff still could not make out any of the man's features, only a vague outline of his upper body. It was as if the man was deliberately shrouding himself in darkness. The figure turned to face Jeff, and although he could not see them, he could feel the man's eyes staring directly at him, penetrating into the deepest regions of his being. "You may not know who I am, but I've been waiting for you for quite some time," the figure said. "You see, I've known about your little reign of terror for quite a while now, and I intend to put a stop to it tonight. But before you die, perhaps I should take a moment to introduce myself. My name is," A cold shiver ran through Jeff's entire body upon hearing the man's name, a name consisting of what Jeff immediately recognized as the last two words he would ever hear: Chuck Norris. I was 17 when she came. I'd been living with my abusive mother for 17 long, painful years. It was around midnight, and my mother was already asleep. So when the 3 soft raps at the front door came, it was me who answered. An odd-looking little girl stood there, with pale and colorless cheeks, blonde hair and braided pigtails, a pink dress torn a little at the hem, feet bare and turning slightly blue from the cold of winter, and black eyes. Fathomless, deep black eyes. I quickly let her in, thinking of how horridly underdressed she was. It wasn't until later that I'd wonder why she'd not been shivering or even question why she was here in the first place. I got her into the living room, wrapping her little form in a thick afghan my grandmother knitted. She held it, though it didn't seem to affect her. And I smiled. "What's your name, sweetie?" A long silence passed, in which she stared at me. I was beginning to be discomforted by her black gaze when she parted her lips and spoke in a soft voice. "Lacey Morgan." I nodded, smiling again. "You can stay here tonight, Lacey," I said, motioning to the couch. She curled up in a little ball, her black eyes still on me, and I exited the room. That night, I slept soundly, not worrying about my mother beating me or the strange little girl on my couch. When morning came and I trudged into the kitchen, I was greeted with a coffee mug to the shoulder. I gave a feeble shout of pain, staring at my mother. "What the hell did you do? Why is there dirt on the couch?" she shouted, confusing me greatly. Upon investigating, I found that Lacey had vanished, the only proof she'd been there being some dirt that must have fallen off her dress or feet. I took responsibility, earning myself a strong hit to my cheek, then left for school. While there, I heard something that sent chills through my spine. Lacey Morgan was found dead last night. I passed the day waiting for more news on the subject, but found none. Upon arriving home, the news was broadcasting a live report on her. Lacey Morgan, 6 years of age, was reported dead at 7 last night. Her body was located in the backyard, buried there in her pink dress. So far, there has been no sign of her mother, Marisa Morgan, who is suspected to be the killer. Marisa has reportedly abused Lacey multiple times and may be responsible for her death. Suddenly, a picture of Lacey appeared on the screen. She appeared very similar to how she had when I met her. Blonde hair in braids, pink dress, pale face. Only her cheeks had color, and her eyes were baby blue. To most, this would seem unimportant, but to me it was. She died before arriving at my house, if what the newscaster said was true. I died hours before. I tried to play it off, going about my business. I went to bed early so as not to have to see my mother. It was around midnight when I awoke to cool fingers stroking the bruise on my cheek. I sighed, leaning into the small hand. "Never again," Lacey whispered before her hand vanished. Not 10 minutes later, I heard my mother screaming. I rushed into her bedroom, nearly fainting at what I saw. My mom was thrashing wildly on her bed, a small creature having buried its face into her chest. I could hear the sound of flesh tearing, and my mother's screaming increased in volume. I wished I hadn't gotten up. Later on, I'd tell myself I hadn't. But I had. So when Lacey pulled back from the gaping hole in my mother's chest cavity, I had a plain view of her razor-sharp teeth, glinting in the light. Glinting with my mother's blood, she smiled innocently at me for a moment before swiftly tearing out my mother's jugular. That time, I did faint. When I came home, I was in bed. I walked to my mom's room, morbid curiosity getting the best of me. Upon opening the door, I found the room empty. The bed was made neatly, as if my mom had left for work early. The only oddities were the dirty child's footprints and the open window, showing that Lacey had in fact visited. I never saw my mother again, and I never missed her either. I eventually got married, and we had a child together. I named her Lacey. Recently, I noticed the neighbor's daughter had all sorts of scrapes and bruises on her arms. I've started watching their house, and the other day I saw something odd. A little girl running barefoot through their backyard up to their back door. It was around midnight, so I couldn't be sure, but I thought she met my eyes with her black ones, and I could swear she mouthed 2 words at me: never again. On the outskirts of some small, nameless town in West Virginia lies a miles-long straight strip of asphalt, known as Samaritan Road. The road is nestled in its peaceful surroundings of trees and an endless landscape of forests on both sides of it. The road itself would appear to be just your average country drive, except for the urban legend it holds. The backstory to the legend does not actually exist, whether the reason is due to an uncreative author, a lack of historical information, or just country folk too traumatized to verbalize whatever happened there. Whatever the case, what happens on that road to unsuspecting travelers is most certainly known by locals. The urban legend goes like this. If you drive down Samaritan Road past midnight, about halfway down the road, at least a 5-mile drive, you will start to feel a bit sick. The sickness itself starts off as a bit of a stomach ache, which makes you wonder if you ate something wrong or if something inside you didn't settle right. Let me warn you right now. Ride out this feeling of nausea by keeping your eyes on the road, ignoring the pain, and driving all the way through Samaritan Road at all costs. This is important. If you listen to my warning, you will be making the best choice of your life. If not, well, I guess it's only fair for me to explain what will probably become of you. If you are feeling the nausea and mentally harping on the pain long enough, the sickness itself will feed on your reaction and cause the pain to grow exponentially. You will feel as though you ate scalpels, pins, needles, scissors, knives. You name it. It will hurt like all hell. Eventually, one thought will float through your brain that will seal your fate. I need some fresh air. In your mind, for some reason or another, you will not feel as though this means you should just open a window for some air. You will feel as though you should pull over and step out of the car to let the fresh forest air nestle you in your car's processed atmosphere. Hell, even if your window was open the whole time you were driving, you will feel as though this sickness itself has been caused by you sitting in that somehow cursed car of yours. This is what she wants you to think. As you get out, you will notice how that first rush of fresh air into your lungs feels as though you are breathing for the first time. A breath of life is being delivered to you. Not in your wildest dreams has the process of breathing seemed so naturally joyous. As you begin to enjoy the surroundings, you may look off into the trees to see if someone is out there. Don't worry. No one is out there in the trees. I can promise you this. You may spend a minute or two gazing out into the forestscape or checking the bottom of your car to find the source of your past case of nausea. Was there some gas leakage that you subconsciously breathed in? A bumpiness in the road you forgot that rattled your intestines? No, that can't be it. As you finally gaze back towards the road, your heart will suddenly skip a beat. On the road will be the figure of a young woman in a white nightgown with long black hair facing away from you. It's common knowledge to the legend that she will always face away from you. You may call her, but she will not respond. You may try to startle her to get her attention, or even throw a rock at her, but I guarantee that she will stay as still as a gargoyle. You will make the choice to confront her. It is always how it works. You may be saying to yourself, "Why? What if I decide to lock myself in my car?" You won't. Believe me. Samaritan Road brings out this sort of natural human feeling in you that you always have to help your fellow man. Such a place of legend actually uses your positive human instincts against you. You will decide to go and confront the woman. But as you do, you will see the headlights of a large vehicle heading your way and moving at breakneck speed towards the woman. You may warn her to get off the road, but as before, she will ignore your words and actions. Don't try to stop the vehicle either. If anyone is even driving it, I doubt they would listen to little old you. At this point, You have two options. One will save your life, and one will bring it to a horrific end. Option 1. As the truck heads your way, run into the road a few feet in front of the girl and yell to the truck, "Have my innocence, sibling of existence." If you did this right, the headlights will disappear and the vehicle will vanish. If not, I cannot say that the gods of large automobiles will be kind to you. That is option 1, the smart option. Option 2. This is the stupid mistake many who do not know how Samaritan Road works tend to make. As the truck comes, you will run towards the young woman and attempt to push her out of the way. As you reach her, she will reveal herself by turning around. Her skin is white and wrinkled, resembling worn, aging leather. She has large, inhuman black eyes and rotting yellow teeth that look like chipped corn cobs. She has no nose, but only 2 slits that looked as though they were cut into the middle of her face. She will scream an ungodly scream that will seem to impale your eardrums, and you will be paralyzed in fear. As you do, she will hover to the side of the road for safety and allow the gigantic vehicle to run you over. You will die of impact as many times as you have. If you happen to make it out of the predicament in option 1, the woman will be gone and you are free to leave. Your good deed on Samaritan Road has been accomplished. Get in your car and drive. For the love of God, just drive. Leave the cursed place and never look back. A million good deeds are not worth the pure hell surrounding the one you have just accomplished. As you leave Samaritan Road, just make sure to keep yourself calm and don't lose focus on your driving. It is customary as you leave the area to hear a young woman's voice whisper to you in the darkness, "Thank you." Back in the late 60s, there existed a religious sect known as the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Their core beliefs were that at the end of the world, Christ and Satan would come together, reconcile, and begin to judge and execute the population. So they worshipped both of them. While this information set people on edge, it did not deter people from becoming members of the process, and the church flourished throughout the 60s and 70s. In that period, an increase was seen in missing children across the United Kingdom, the Mexican Yucatan Peninsula, and even in the state of New Orleans. Kids ranging from as young as 3 to as old as 10 were being taken on walks home, in their front yards, and even sometimes from their homes in the dead of night. Bodies were rarely recovered. When they were, well, let's just say it was quickly established that it would have been better for the families to simply hold out hope for a safe return. What was done to these children was simply horrifying. Every unspeakable act you can possibly think of in order to inflict pain was carried out. All children were left completely blind, with a look of indescribable pain and terror on their faces if any were discovered by the authorities, or, God forbid, passers-by. Due to the satanic panic raging throughout the United States and United Kingdom at the time, most information regarding satanic cults or missing persons cases was kept under lock and key so as not to cause mass hysteria. One particular incident caused so much havoc that it was feared that if brought to the public's attention, it would shock the nation to its core. On October 12, 1975, a photograph was posted to the local authorities in 15 states in the USA and 5 counties in the UK, all receiving the same image, the one you see accompanying this story. On October 13th, a normal middle-class family in Essex was settling down for the night when the father heard his son screaming from his room. As he darted upstairs, he found a man in a white lab coat, goggles, and a modified gas mask towering over his frightened 7-year-old son. The father reacted quickly and subdued the man before calling the authorities. When he was brought in, he was identified as Reverend Michael Turnwell, though he had no records of ever living in the area. In fact, the residence he was registered at was 300 miles away. What was he doing way out here? In his pockets, they found a bottle of chloroform, a rag, a switchblade knife, and a small pocketbook, filled from cover to cover with incomprehensible gibberish mixed in with citations from the satanic verses, diegetics, and the Old Testament. When asked what the hell he was doing with all these items and his purpose for that young boy, he simply smiled wide-eyed and said, "I'm doing God's work." They needed to see the light. Under further interrogation, it was revealed he was a member of the Church of the Process, and he agreed to show the police where the children were being taken in exchange for protection, assuring them all the while that the children are fine. They're with God now. They saw the light. Not fully understanding this vague reference, they persisted and got him to open up. This is what he told them. "We knew that the children could be spared judgment, for they do not understand sin. They are pure. But in order to be accepted into God's loving arms, they first needed to see the light. So we subjected it to them with the God machine. Those who became blind or removed their goggles were punished accordingly. Those that were not blinded were accepted into God's flock, their souls escaping their bodies and their shells to be used as we saw fit. They were no longer harboring any children." He trailed off, giggling like a child. "Those were our toys to play with. And believe me, officers, we did enjoy our toys, even if they broke sometimes. Love the sinner, hate the sinner." He burst out laughing, the room seemingly shaking around him. After a few moments, they asked him what happened to the children that turned around, as all the children positioned in this image were facing outward. The Reverend gave a sick, twisted smile and said slowly, in an unnaturally deep voice, "They are the ones who become part of His legion. Who you think carries on our work once some of us get caught or perish? We are everywhere, detective. We will bring all children to the light. You simply need to look west, and you will know the face of evil." He suddenly leaned forward to intently stare at the detectives opposite him and asked sadistically, "Tell me, do you have children?" He was found dead in his cell the following morning, having concealed a cyanide cap in one of his teeth. Some weeks later, one of the officers involved in the case lost their child, a little boy. He simply vanished one day while walking home from school. His body was never recovered. Serial killers Fred and Rose West were caught 19 years later, on February 24, 1994, after a 20-year spree in which they raped and killed more than 13 people, including their own children. When Fred was interrogated, he mentioned that 20 children were captured and killed by himself, Rose, and others he did not know of in a barn not too far from where they lived. When asked how he managed to capture all of them so easily, he simply smiled and said, "It's easy when you live directly next to a church." The paranormal was something that the three of us felt we were beyond. We all like to think of ourselves as educated, and when we got into arguments, we felt nearly invincible. But when Martin insisted we fuck around with his fat older brother's laptop full of occult pictures and documents, and when he promised to involve some of his best weed, the three of us decided to meet up in John's basement, a hallowed smoking ground. After a couple bowls, the three of us stared into the glow of the HP screen, clicking through folders labeled Demons, Rituals Life, Rituals Strength, Hexes, Facing, and Lucid Dreaming. Every folder was full of sketchy Polaroid pictures of pale figures with twisted triangular faces and fingers like twigs, long pieces of text containing foreign languages and symbols, and intricate diagrams for sigils and sacrifices. It was some mind-bending shit for stoned 17-year-olds. We found a project in a folder labeled Summoning. It contained tons of pictures and diagrams for calling things to this world. From hell, from other dimensions, from something that one image referred to as the else, and we picked one at random to mess around with and laugh through. The diagram called for a little prep. We needed only to light some incense and say some incantations, all in some language that none of us had heard of. The entity that the diagram described lived in some place referred to as over the wall, and tons of red text littered the picture. It all warned of dealing with the entity and its numerous powers, and it included short accounts of the lives it had ruined, including a pretty sick one about a woman whose guts it had removed and played with, and a few more involving figures without eyes found wandering the scene of the summoning. The thing was a curious but impatient being. It liked stalking us humans, watching and observing, before it grew more malicious and started taking us, experimenting on us, driving us to do things for it, seeing what made us squeal, cry, or bleed. We got everything set up, and John volunteered to read off of the screen. Let me tell you, watching John fumble through that booga booga language was the highlight of the night. We laughed through the whole thing, with John tripping over words and destroying some through his own chuckles. Even when Martin put up his hands to settle us down, the snickers would get through and flare back into laughter. I decided to pull out my camera then. It had become tradition to film these basement sessions, and it seemed John was going for an Academy Award. We sort of gave up with the laptop after the camera came out. We were getting bored, and John ran out of words to read. Eventually, we all started passing the camera around and speaking into it directly, kind of doing that 70s show round table thing. We'd say something intelligent, revelatory, or funny, and then pass the camera on. It was a way of documenting some indispensable hilarity to look back on the next day. The night passed quickly. I remember turning on the TV, and at some point Martin and I packed up the laptop and walked back to his house so John could pass out on his couch, but events leaked in and out of memory after the night in question. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone full of unread texts and missed calls, all from John. The gist of the messages was "Get your ass over here," and the voice delivering the voicemails wasn't that of the easy stoner I was used to dealing with. He spoke in unconnected, short clips, a lopsided train of thought. I found it downstairs. For fun, you know. Supposed to. Just thought I found it in the camera. To see, you need to see. It was supposed to be fun. Just over here. Get over here, please. John sounded completely stern, almost lifeless. Something that set a million little alarm bells off in my head. I went to find Martin, who had also gotten a phone full of messages, and we returned to John's house. We found him upstairs in the TV room. He'd hooked up my leftover camera from last night and was watching the new stuff we'd recorded, pausing and fast-forwarding, stopping every now and then to watch. Martin and I crept into the room and took places quietly on the couch. We didn't want to interrupt. The footage played on as I'd remembered it happening, and I watched as John on screen recited the incantations. Coming from his mouth, they sounded entirely made up yet rhythmic, like poems from some other country. In the video, we'd been cracking up, and the sound of chocked laughs and giggles bounced around the room, but watching it again made me feel weird, like I was seeing and hearing something I shouldn't be, almost like snuff. I looked at Martin, and then at John. John's stone face, Martin's mouth slightly agape, and the feeling that I was watching something forbidden made me feel like it had been a mistake to record last night. I finally asked John what was up, why he called us, and why he seemed so somber, and he gave a cold, knowing answer: keep watching. So we did. The night on the tape played out, filling in memory gaps here and there as it played. It ran to the point where we started talking into the camera and passing it around. John looked as though he'd snap at either of us at any moment, so I didn't dare ask what we were looking for. Finally, in the video, I passed off the camera, and John hit pause. See. Well? John alternated a stare, almost accusingly, between where Martin and I were watching and the TV screen itself. I glanced at Martin, and he shook his head. On the screen, we were all sitting together on John's couch, throwing up rock and roll devil horns with our hands, stoned out of our minds. I stared at the image for a few fruitless seconds, but then it hit me like a train. I saw what John called us over to see, and it made me feel nauseous. John said it before I could. Who the fuck is holding the camera? It was on the last day of the year 2015 which we received our message. We were preparing for a New Year's party and cleaning the attic. We thought there'd be chairs. What he thought instead was a cassette tape player. It was, no doubt, from at least the 80s. My sister was the one to find it. I was the one to press play. Neither of us knew how to work the thing. The pressing space had yet to help. My sister realized the volume was down and turned it up. Unfortunately, we had one more issue. It was slow beyond recognition. I left the attic by this time. We needed more time to fix an old cassette player. My sister, on the other hand, stayed. I started getting ready for the party we were throwing for New Year's Eve and continued my work for at least an hour until I realized my sister had not come down to help me yet. "Rachel, you okay?" I called. There wasn't a response. I called again. "Rachel." Frightened, something could have happened. I ran up to the attic. I opened up the door and found her listening to the cassette tape. "Rachel, I thought you were hurt. Why didn't you answer me?" She looked up at me with a blank stare and a glimmer of fear. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I got the player to work, see?" "Yeah, I see. But we need to get ready. In 15 minutes, people will be showing up to the party." "Hold on," she said, fumbling with the player. "What? Listen to this." "No, didn't you hear? People will be coming soon." I assessed the situation. I could finish getting ready for the party alone. Rachel was going to be a little help. Fine then. I left the attic and ran around the house, fixing a table and getting snacks. When I finished, the doorbell rang almost as I put the last bag of chips on the table. The party was going well. Around 11:45, most people arrived. We were all excited for New Year's. What would the future bring? The best moment I only lasted a few moments. My sister ran down the stairs to call me into the attic. Her face was pale. I went upstairs. "What? What's wrong?" "Listen to the tapes," she commanded. The tape played. Case 205A, James Edmund Brown of the Charles Millennium Asylum. Certifiably insane. He claims he's from the future. "Hello? Hello?" Another voice in the tape called, presumably James Edmund Brown. "Hi. I need to send a message. I could tell you about all other catastrophes, but I must warn you about the end. This isn't some terrorist attack. This isn't some war. This isn't even what I'd call a natural disaster. This is an unstoppable event, unless we can find some way to prevent it from ever happening. Let's see. I'm from 2016, and it just happened like clockwork. First, we heard the booming. Then, at exactly midnight, the meteors came. We never even saw them coming. They just appeared out of nowhere. I'm most scared about whenever someone finds this message. Hopefully, it won't be too late. The universe works like that. Sometimes, something is meant to happen. With hope, dear listener, you may not find this tape the same day the end happens. Please listen. Whatever you're doing, stop. Try to leave. There's no point in making the shelter. You'll die anyway. I'm not even sure how I'm still alive. Please, just..." The tape ended. Rachel looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Rachel, we'll be fine. Wasn't this guy in a mental hospital or something? But what is this tape doing here?" And I thought I heard loud bangs. So, James Brown mentions booming in his explanation of his end. I heard them too. They were just fireworks. It's New Year's Eve. Of course, people will be celebrating. This is why you've got to stop watching the Sci-Fi Channel. I don't know. She seemed calmer. When we got down, the people were already slowly dancing to Forever Young. It was 11:59 when the house shook. Everybody screamed until one of my friends calmed all of them down. "It's just an earthquake," my friend said. Rachel was the only one still screaming. She ran outside. I yelled her name and followed her to the door. She left the house, and I found her out in the street when I got to the door. My watch beeped. It was noon. Like clockwork, the stars fell. Meteors. We found out what the future would bring, and we were horrified. Transcript taken from a video found under the link. The scariest story ever. The video feed turns on in night vision mode. A teen girl, pale in the greenish light, stands in front of a leathery black backdrop and runs through it. Her pupils glow as the light hits them, turning the same pale green as her skin while her iris stays black. She begins to speak in a calm, clear voice. My life has been a living hell. I can barely remember a time when I wasn't afraid, and even that seems like it was years ago. But I know it hasn't been years since this started. It started 3 days ago. It started with the video. The video was much like this one is. A cute teen boy is filming himself on one of those cheap video cameras, making a home movie in the dark. His voice was calm and sweet, completely the opposite of what he was saying. What he was saying was dark and cold. I should never have watched that video. You shouldn't be watching this one. This is your last chance to turn back, to turn off the video, and to save yourself from the terror that awaits you. Turn it off now. I see you didn't listen. I don't blame you. I didn't listen to his warning either. I thought I could handle the story that was to come. I was dead wrong. I applaud you for your bravery, but you were stupid. Oh well. No turning back now. I suppose I should tell you what you're in for. He never did that for me. He didn't do anything for me. Everything was for himself. He said that they were looking for recruits for the group he was a part of. I was to be their newest recruit, having seen the video. That confused me. How was he supposed to find me? And what if I didn't want to be part of their group? The latter obviously didn't occur to him. He said it with such finality that it was as if no one in their right mind would refuse to be in the group, or that you had no choice in the matter. He explained that special abilities and rewards were granted to those in the group. Granted. As if I had a choice. I suppose the abilities aren't that bad. You'll find out soon enough. At the end of the video, he said they were coming for me, to be ready for their arrival. That freaked me out. His voice was soothing but firm as he said that, and I had no doubt in my mind that they would find me. They did. That night. I was half asleep when they came, roused by an eerie silence and an odd, frightened feeling. Suddenly, I heard a rustling from outside my window. A whoosh followed soon after. I ran to the window, and there they were. 5 of them, beckoning. They were smiling, but their eyes were cold and menacing. I screamed and ran toward my parents' room on the opposite side of the house. I passed a hall window just as something huge swooped past it, too fast for me to make out. I glanced out the window as I sprinted down the hall, and there they were on the front lawn, still beckoning, looking slightly annoyed. I made it to my parents' bedroom and shoved them out of bed and to their window. Nothing. I pushed them toward my bedroom window. Nothing. They were gone. Annoyed, my parents scolded me, saying I was too old for these kinds of nightmares. If only that were true. They were everywhere the next day. On the drive to school, they were standing at the edge of the forests that border the road. Standing. Staring. My mom saw nothing. During classes, they were in the forest circling the school, just visible from the classroom windows. They darted in and out of sight, too fast for a normal human. I was the only one who saw them. By this time, they were visibly agitated. A few looked furious. I was a nervous wreck. It was only a matter of time before they got to me. They got me that night. I didn't stand a chance. I stayed awake, lying in bed, trying not to look out the window. I didn't want to know where they were. I should have checked. A hand burst through the window, shattering the glass. I ran for the door, but he was too quick for me. He got there before I did. His sweetness was gone. Rage poured from his body and out of his bright red eyes. I shrank to the floor, terror taking hold. I felt 2 sharp needle pricks and lost consciousness. When I woke up, they explained my new abilities. I liked them. I liked being able to run so fast that people saw only a blur. I liked being much stronger than all of the boys at my school. I didn't like that I wasn't permitted to leave. There is no one here that I can relate to. Everyone else has been here so long that they've forgotten how to be human and how to be a teenager. Oh well, I'll have you here soon. We can be friends." The girl adjusts her position slightly, stretching and getting more comfortable. The backdrop moves with her, stretching out slightly and then folding in on itself. It attaches to the girl at her shoulder blades. It is a pair of wings. Good luck trying to escape. You're going to need it. They have been doing this for centuries. They know exactly what you're going to try. You'll see me tonight. We'll be watching. The girl smiles slightly, then turns to look at the buttons controlling the camera. The feed ends. There might be some noise. That's what she had said. A phrase that did not even begin to describe what we heard every night. Those agonized screams are nothing a human should ever make. We had just signed the contract and wanted to go from house to house to introduce ourselves to the neighbors. Hers was the door to our right, the first door we knocked on. J&K was written on the doorbell in fancy letters. She must have been around 60, but her pale skin and the large dark rings around her eyes made her look at least a decade older. "I'm Christina," she said, "and I want to apologize in advance. My husband is not really well, and sometimes there might be some noise." "No problem," I said. "Really," she said, "Jonathan is not very well. But please don't call the police on us. Of course, we understand. He is on his bed. I can show him to you." "It's okay," I said. "We will drop by another time." We turned to leave. She stopped us. "Really, please believe me. He really is just sick. He is not dangerous." Claire and I exchanged glances. "That's okay," Claire said. "Don't worry about us." "Sure?" Christine asked. "Sure," I said. We felt her stare on our backs while we walked down the small path back towards the street. The moving van came a week later. Our lives were thrown into the center of the empty living room. The day was soaking our shirts with sweat, but we were happy. A new place. The perfect place. We had pizza and beer and walked in celebration around the house. Singing and dancing. We enjoyed our new home. That's when we saw him the first time, at Christine's house. Ground floor, the window just opposite my new office. He was wrapped in a blanket up to his chest. Blue pajamas. Wrinkled eyelids are deeply shut. A white table with bandages and medicine stood to his side. Jonathan. His hair and skin were so gray that I wondered whether he had been alive when they built the pyramids. The door in his room opened. We quickly walked on. It was precisely 11:45 p.m. We were just getting ready for bed. Claire was in the bathroom, and I was already on the bed and waiting for her. Those screams. The word agony does not even begin to describe them. There were no words, just guttural sounds, roaring and moaning, like an animal hoping for death. His screams stopped exactly at midnight. Did it stop? I hope so. "My God," Claire said. "What's wrong with him?" I shook my head. "No idea. I hope it's not every night like that." "I'm sure it won't." I was wrong. I used my office the next day. Only for a short while, but long enough to stare at the open window opposite my own, and long enough to feel a nervous cold run up my spine. Jonathan lay there all day. His eyes closed, and his hands were on top of the blanket. No sound. No move, still like a statue during the day. Screams of agony at night, more and more. I found myself in that office at night. I pretended to work, but in truth, I was watching. At around 11 p.m., Christine would always enter the room. She held a bowl and then closed the windows and curtains. 15 minutes before midnight, we would hear his screams again. From midnight on, silence, we learned to listen to loud music. Drums and choir vocals worked well to cover the screams. It was a Sunday, just 2 weeks after we had moved in. Claire had seen Christine leave early in the morning. Christine came back just before noon. I was outside when her car pulled into the driveway with boxes stuffed into the back of her car. I took a few steps up her driveway. "Do you need help?" "No," Christine said. "I never need help." She walked around the car and stood in front of the back window. "Anything else?" "It's okay," I said. "Jonathan is fine. You hear me? He is fine." "Okay. We don't need your help." "Okay." I turned to walk back to our house. And Christine said, "As said, I'm sorry for the noise." That night, I had the lights off and waited for her to come. Christine entered the room, but her sleeve caught on the door handle. The bowl fell from her hands. That's why she must have forgotten about the curtain. She cursed and quickly left the room. When she was back, she had another bowl and set it down on the white table. She pulled the blanket aside. She placed a large strap over his chest. She chained his arms and legs to the bed. She placed another strap over his forehead and pulled it tight. Christine froze halfway while turning back towards the table. Quickly, she ran towards the window. She glanced outside, first to the right and left, and then towards my window. Her eyes seemed to scan the darkness inside the room. Then she pulled the curtains shut. It was another week later. Claire saw Christine sitting on her own doorstep. Christine was holding her side. The left side of her face seemed limp. "Are you okay?" "Sure," Christine said. "I'm always okay. Just a bit dizzy." Claire walked up the driveway. "Do you need help?" Christine jumped to her feet, but quickly fell for the wall. "No," she screamed. "We never need help." The door slammed shut behind her. Claire was upset and angry, and still she was worried too. I wanted to get our minds on those things. We watched TV rather than the window. We only noticed half an hour after midnight that we hadn't heard any screams. I checked the window. He was there on his bed, soundly asleep. The room was dark. I guess that's why I only noticed it in the morning. Red stains all over his clothes. The police said that half their basement was filled with empty baby food glasses. They found Christine's upper half on the living room floor. A stroke, that's what they said. They found Christine's lower half on the bedroom floor, right next to him. His body, they said, was long and cold. Still, they couldn't find a cause of death. Their burial was a week later. Urns are buried in deep holes. There were not many people at the burial. No friends, no family, just neighbors. It was one of the other neighbors who told me about it. He said he heard it from a friend. He heard that the cremation was done faster than is customary. Normally, they take 2 or 3 days. But for Christine and Jonathan, he said, it was done the next day. They didn't even wait for the cremation until the morning, he said. They did it just after midnight. Perhaps you have heard the legend of the supposed holy hour that occurs on certain days of the year: Christmas, Easter, Good Friday, November 1, and the first of both February and August, each day between 7 and 8 a.m., not including daylight savings time, mind you, because it is a human invention and supernatural entities do not observe it. When you were a kid, this was the hour in which you probably opened Christmas presents and started tearing apart your Easter basket after dragging your parents out of bed, and much to your parents' chagrin, you refused to eat anything but leftover Halloween candy from the day before for breakfast. However, more than likely, you had never gone into a darkened room in preparation for this ritual. However, perhaps you've heard others speak of it. Go into a room with a mirror, preferably one without windows, between 7 and 8 a.m. on any one of the dates listed above. You do not have to perform this ritual alone. If you have any friends, you may in fact want them to come in with you to help you perform specific tasks outlined that are difficult to do in the dark. Important: the only light in this ritual must come from either a candle or a lighter, some tiny flickering flame. Save for this light, you must be in total darkness. Otherwise, there is a strong possibility that you won't see anything, hence the suggestion that you perform this in a room without windows. However, it all depends on your own sensitivity to the paranormal. When my friend performed this ritual on November 1, we had to shut all the doors in the hallway first because the light from the door crack kept distracting him. Make sure that you perform this ritual in comfortable clothing. You want to avoid any unnecessary once inside this room. Close the door and light your candles and slash or your lighter. This or these flames must remain lit until the end of the ritual, although I know of people who have chickened out and blown the flames out, which instantly ends it and generally leaves them wallowing in their own cowardice for days on end afterwards. You may have your friends hold or light the candles or lighter if desired, as long as the flame is reflected in the mirror. Now begin chanting some Christian prayer. Anyone will do, even the sinner's prayer on the back of those chick tracts, as long as it mentions God, Jesus, or the Holy Ghost at least once. As you stare into the mirror, it must be the same prayer, and again, the number of times you need to chant this prayer varies depending on your own sensitivities to the paranormal, but generally 20 times is more than enough. My friend chose Our Father, and he needed to chant it 15 or 16 times. When you have chanted for long enough, one of your flames will flare and then change color. Ours turned red, but I've heard of flames turning blue, white, and even green and lavender before. A few seconds later, an image will appear in the mirror of the Archangel Michael. He looks a lot like the usual images of Christian angels, only he has this really nasty burn mark on the left side of his face. Also, he has really deep-set eyes. Bow to Michael. Again, it is important to make sure you don't accidentally put out your flames, unless you wish to end the ritual. After you bow to him, Michael will ask you if you are entirely certain that you want to perform this ritual. I can't really describe the voice, but it's not the sort of voice you'd expect an archangel to have. It's kind of scratchy and overall not very pleasant to listen to, and he has a faint accent of indeterminable origin. After you answer yes, Michael will explain the conditions of the ritual. He will ask you 7 questions, and if you answer at least 4 of them right, he will either allow a conversation with a deceased loved one or give a living one immortality. However, if you answer 3 or fewer of them correctly, he will slit your throat, and you will die right then and there. I'll admit that I actually do not remember any of the 7 riddles from when my friend did this, but I do remember that they were rather arcane, i.e., not the type of riddles you would find in a riddle book, and he seemed to be fully aware of this. Also, if I remember correctly, each one consisted of 7 words. My friend never did well at riddles, so you can imagine that he didn't get any right, which seemed to amuse the hell out of Michael, as by the end of the ritual he had this big, terrifying, Joker-like smile on his face. After you are finished answering the riddles, you only get 1 try at each, but he lets you think. Michael gives you the score. Again, if you answer 3 or fewer right, he smites you. While he smites you, he says something in the angelic language, Enochian, I believe it's called, and you're left writhing on the floor in agony. My friend was screaming his head off when the ritual was over, and he started speaking in tongues. It was horrible, and I'm currently in therapy for this. Really fucking horrifying. But I digress. Anyway, the candles all went out, and the lighter he had me hold died at the exact same time. I left the room feeling dizzy and passed out on my bed in my own vomit. The strange thing is that I woke up 8 hours later and went into the bathroom, where I performed the ritual, and found no trace of my dead friend in there. Strangely, I live alone, and all my doors and windows were locked. There was no sign of anyone having broken into my apartment. The landlady was on vacation, and no matter how hard I looked in the bathroom, I could not find a single trace of my friend's blood anywhere. A few days later, I got a call from his roommate, asking about my friend. According to his roommate, my friend disappeared on Halloween night and hasn't been seen at all since. He had called all around, asking my friend's parents, siblings, aunt, uncle, people like the guy at the convenience store where my friend bought his cigarettes, and even his old teachers from grade school if they knew anything about his whereabouts, only to get a resounding no. He decided to call me because apparently I was the only person out of the people both he and my friend knew that he hadn't called yet. So I told him exactly what happened, down to my friend's body mysteriously disappearing. He didn't believe me and reported me to the police, but when the police came to investigate, they did not find any trace of my friend either, not even his DNA. It's almost like he never came over to my house and instead chose to fall off the face of the earth and leave his friends behind. On a side note, I've heard that someone, in fact, by some miracle, did get all of the riddles right, and they wished for the immortality of whoever. However, the next day, their loved one was not alive. They, much like my friend, were mysteriously spirited away. Only this time on the wall of their room, there was a message in some mysterious language, written in blood. Perhaps only God and the Archangel Michael know what has become of the two of them.